Poland. You'll get your video someday. Potentially. In our timeline, the Polish-Soviet War that lasted between 1919 to 1921 was a pivotal conflict where the newly re-established Polish state fought hard for its independence and managed to halt and then repel the Red Army, most famously at the Battle of Warsaw in 1920, which secured Polish independence for a whole 18 years until they got game-banged by the Soviets and the No-No Germans in 1939. But what if that changed? What if the Soviets succeeded in conquering Poland in 1920? The point of divergence starts in 1920 during the Battle of Warsaw. In our timeline, the Red Army's advance into Poland was divided into two major fronts, where some Soviet forces pushed towards Warsaw from the north, while some other Soviet forces pushed towards Lviv in the south. If the southern forces were redirected to the north to support the northern forces at the Battle of Warsaw instead of fighting to conquer Lviv like in our timeline, then they could have outflanked the Poles to invade the capital. Then during the Battle of Warsaw, the Soviets could then conduct a concentrated and quick attack on Warsaw instead of trying to encircle the entire Polish army like they did in our timeline, and by doing this, Warsaw would be able to fall, which would cripple Polish morale and their hopes of winning the war, which could eventually lead to a negotiated surrender. In the peace treaty, historians debate whether the Soviets wanted to fully annex Poland or turn it into a puppet communist state like they later did after World War II. Most likely, they would have done what they did with Ukraine and Belarus, where they would establish a Polish-Soviet Socialist Republic under communist leadership, then used local communist sympathizers like the Polish Communist Party to form a puppet government, and then eventually integrate Poland into the Soviet Union, which is what we will assume will happen in this alternate scenario. From here, we know that Lenin and the Bolsheviks' next ambitions would be to further spread the communist revolution to Western Europe, which would now have access to the addition of Poland into their union. With better access to the Baltics, combined with a stronger military that didn't fight against Poland for nearly as long as they did in our timeline and war-weary great powers from World War I, the Soviets would soon after the conquest of Poland invade the Baltics, which they would be able to successfully conquer in this timeline, along with the Caucasus in our timeline in the early 20s and annex them into the Union. Also with direct access to Czechoslovakia, they would be able to influence them more. In our timeline, the Czechoslovakians had a large and powerful communist movement that eventually led to them seizing power in a coup in 1948. By 1925 in our timeline, Stalin just came into power and the Communist Party was the second largest party in Czechoslovakia, and with now direct support from the Soviets, the movement would become much larger in this timeline, quite possibly leading to a Communist Party being directly elected into power in 1925, and if not, a coup being launched, which will eventually lead to them becoming a Soviet puppet. After Czechoslovakia becomes communist, the Soviets would then gain access to Hungary's border. In our timeline during 1919, Hungary actually had a short-lived communist regime that was led by Balkan and was soon after toppled by Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia with Allied approval. In this timeline, the Soviets would now have access to northern Hungary and could help the communist Hungarians revive the regime, launch a coup, and successfully gain control over the country. From here, Romania and Yugoslavia would most likely intervene and support anti-communists in Romania, which would lead to an all-out war happening. If that happens and they go to war with them, the Soviets could team up with Bulgaria because they had claims over Macedonia and Yugoslavia and the southeast of Romania, and on top of that, they also had a large communist movement that would support the war. With Bulgaria being supplied through the Black Sea, they could push into the claimed regions while the Hungarian communists and nationalists focused on putting down rebellions and then going on to the offensive, taking back parts of Transnistria and the Romanian parts of Yugoslavia from Romania, as well as Croatia. The Soviets were focused on supplying their allies, while also taking back Moldavia and using the ethnic tensions in Yugoslavia to completely collapse it. Then, after fully being cut off from the Black Sea, Romania would surrender, officially ending the war. In the peace treaty, Hungary would expand their territory and would annex all of their former lands from its empire, with the Soviets giving them back Slovakia as well. The rest of Romania would be partitioned between the Soviets and Bulgaria, with this rump state being all that's left. Bulgaria will expand into Macedonia, and the rest of Yugoslavia would be divided from a civil war. After the war is done, Italy could gain Slovenia and Albania for staying neutral, which is a deal that the Soviets could make with them during the beginning stages of the war, which they would happily accept because their military would definitely not be ready for a war at that time. Hell, their military wasn't even ready for World War II in our timeline, and World War I. From there, the Soviets would consolidate their influence in the Balkans by installing communist regimes in all of the countries that didn't install communist regimes on their own. They would also eventually install a puppet state in Bulgaria who had a big communist movement during this time, which would be much bigger in this timeline. They would also have ambitions to expand into Macedonian Greece, which the Soviets would eventually do, but would hold out on Turkey because although they could partition it between themselves and Bulgaria, they would become a little bit too close to France and Britain's colonies for their liking. By this point, the war weariness would start to waver between France and Britain, and after losing all of Eastern Europe, they would start to become seriously worried about future communist expansionism, but it wouldn't matter because by this point, they would start feeling a little bit depressed. Some may even say, the Great Depression. The Great Depression only affected the West, and since the Soviets in our timeline were connected economically to the West, they didn't suffer from the Great Depression. In this timeline, however, with communism being spread to all of Eastern Europe, that would mean that all of Eastern Europe wouldn't be economically affected from the Great Depression as well. It already was a big enough propaganda win for the Soviets in our timeline, and in this timeline, it would be so much bigger, and the Soviets would use that to spread communist ideals to Western Europe. While the West gets weaker and weaker from the Great Depression, the East would continue to get stronger and stronger as they recover from the revolution, and the Soviets consolidate Eastern Europe even more. From here, the logical next step for the communists would be to spread the revolution to Germany, but whether or not they would have succeeded would be debatable, so I came up with 3 scenarios that are entirely possible. The first one would be the Soviets successfully spreading the revolution to Germany, making them communist, and having a powerful puppet state that can help them spread the revolution to the rest of Europe. The second scenario would be the Communist favored German party, taking over Germany like in our timeline, but earlier because although there were significant communist movements in Germany, many Germans blamed the communists for all the chaos after World War I because of the failed revolts of 1919 to 1920. The German right-wing paramilitary groups already crushed communist uprisings in Berlin and Bavaria, and on top of that, if the Red Army invaded, even some German leftists might have turned against the communists because they would see them as foreign invaders. Although both of those scenarios are entirely possible, the one scenario that I think is most probable is Germany having an all-out civil war in the 1920s. This is because both communist and fascist sympathizers would increase rapidly because most of the communist sympathizers would see the Soviet Union's successes and believe that they too can spread the revolution to their country, with the Soviets backing up the Communist Party of Germany, while a new fascist leader could rise like Ludendorff or another general, with that dude that Connie West idolizes in a reduced role within Connie West's favorite German party. Alternatively, Connie West's idol could have risen to prominence earlier between 1925 to 1928 instead of the 1930s like in our timeline by rallying the Germans against communism instead of the Jews. As the two factions rise in prominence, more and more Germans will begin to choose their sides, and one thing will soon become clear: the Weimar Republic will soon fall to one side or another. The Red Army, after bolstering their army during the Great Depression, will then launch an invasion in East Prussia and march towards Berlin, claiming to support a workers' revolution, while the German communists launch uprisings in Berlin, Hamburg, Leipzig, and the industrial Ruhr region where the workers' councilors were located in our timeline. Taking advantage of the chaos The fascists would be burned to the nationalists to gain more support from the West against communism beforehand, will also start to revolt in hopes to gain power to combat the communists. The Weimar Republic, in response to this invasion and uprisings, would declare martial law and mobilize the German army and the German paramilitary groups, which would be supported by Britain and France, who would be fearing the spread of communism. The Soviets would then finish their march to Berlin and fully kick out the Weimar Republic from it, and then launch an invasion from the Polish SSR and Chechnya, fully encircling and capturing Silesia, while also doing the same thing eventually to Central Prussia, while also reinforcing their spearhead to Berlin. Communist uprisings will quickly gain speed, while the nationalists will also rebel a bit more as well. As time goes on, the Weimar Republic's army would face mutiny and desertions from the army, because many of the Germans would sympathize with either the communists or the fascists, and then eventually the Weimar Republic would have completely collapsed, and Germany would be left in a full-scale civil war. With the fall of the Weimar Republic, France and Britain switch over their support to the fascist faction, and France moves more troops over into the Rhineland along with British troops, and they then lend support to the nationalists. Eventually, the fascists and the Allies consolidate into one united front, with the fascists establishing control over the rest of Germany and the communists controlling the east of Germany. With a now united front line, the communists and Allies officially start to clash against each other, causing the Second World War to officially begin. So with that, the world descends into the chaos of war, and the answer is unclear as to who will win in this alternate World War II. Will the White Axis crush all of the communist uprisings and achieve victory, or will the Red Axis collapse all of its adversaries through revolution? Let me know in the comment section below. If you want to see a part 2 to this video, I will release it in the format of a what if everything went perfect for the Soviet Union video, which will be coming out soon. Until then, don't get anyone pregnant, but if you do, make sure they're hot, and I will see you all in the next video.